Life and Adventures of Jack Engle, an Auto-Biography, in which the reader will find some familiar characters, by Walt Whitman. Read by Frank Blissett. Chapter 17. The appointed hour arrived, and there I was ready and away with my prize. Martha, I saw by the flashing of a lamp as we passed, looked as pale as ashes. But there could be no mistaking the resolution, amounting to sternness, in her eyes. Her compressed lips, too, and that whole expression of her features were so unusual as to give her an appearance I had never remarked in her before. Could the gentle Quaker girl, indeed, have all this time contained such elements of spirit and promptitude? I had not understood her properly, that was certain. Nat hurried to us from the corner nearby, where he had been waiting. He had his dog Jack with him, and the two, with a certain activity, were more quiet than usual for them. "Mr. Peterson and I've got the boat waiting," said Nat, "and we'll soon row you over." As for that, if it were necessary, I could take a hand myself, thanks to the practice which most New York boys get along her docks and shores. Nat told us that he had almost given us up, and was just on the point of departure. He supposed that some unforeseen obstacle intervened, and Martha's flight had been postponed to a more convenient season. Martha's bundle, I gave it to Nat with a great caution of its importance. We hurried rapidly along the streets, Martha holding to my arm, though she needed little support, for the brave girl felt in this emergency of her life, as she afterward told me, fully capable of tracking her own part, even should some still more eventful crisis occur, and should she become deprived of my support. Nat, carrying the parcel which Martha had brought away, was the only cause I had for disturbance. Our quick steps and a certain flutter which could not be avoided in our demeanor, joined with this parcel, I feared, might arouse the inquisitive suspicions of the watchmen. I at first thought of directing Nat to keep some distance behind us, but as we didn't know exactly the locality of the dock where, as he informed us, the boat lay, and indeed, as we took our course from street to street, and hurriedly around corner after corner, without settled plan, there was no other way than to stick together and ruin our chances. "What is your hurry, neighbors?" saluted our ears as a watchman stepped out from the doorway of a corner grocery we were wending by. I looked him as coolly as I could in the face, and asked him what he meant by stopping us in that manner. "No offense," said he, "only I always try to do my duty." "Well, what has your duty to do with us?" "Perhaps nothing, and then, again, perhaps something," was his answer. I suppressed my annoyance as well as I could, when Martha, with woman's instinct, remarked with a quiet tone, "Now, friend, do not prevent us, but take this shilling and refresh thyself with some coffee, and let us go on our way peaceably." The gentle voice of Martha, whose manner showed her to be so different from what the guardian of the night no doubt supposed, reassured him probably more than the coin, and he said he did not mean any harm, but he had to look out and do his duty. We hurried on as before, and were within a couple of squares of the river, when we were suddenly stopped from behind by two watchmen, one of whom laid a hand firmly on my shoulder. "What's your hurry this dark night?" he said coolly. I didn't like his tone at all. If there be anything in a man's voice to judge his intentions by, he was a different fellow from the one whose good offices we had escaped a few minutes before. Besides, there were two of 'em, and in such a case a little gratuity was not likely to have any effect. "What have you in that bundle?" said he to Nat. I felt Martha's arm tremble a little, but she answered distinctly, "The young man carries some clothing and other things that belong to me." "Are you sure they have always belonged to you?" said he. "Perfectly sure," said Martha, with a self-possession that fully equaled that of her interrogator. "And what is your name?" he asked again. Martha made no answer to this question, and there was a pause, which I felt to be an awkward one. "That can be of little consequence," said I, "and you must excuse her from answering your question." "There's no harm or disgrace in honest men, or women either, telling their names," said he, peering sharply into Martha's face. She stood his look without wincing, but still made no reply. "Ladies do not care about such, to all people, honest and delicate as they may be," said I, for want of something better to say, "but I will cheerfully give you my address." He took the parcel from Nat, although that young gentleman showed signs of a somewhat pugnacious spirit, and refused at first to give it up, preferring, as he said, to keep it in his own possession until demanded by some authority having a proper right. But I signed to him to make no opposition, as I supposed the officer wished to see if there were any special evidences wherefrom he might come at once to some judgment on the good or bad ground of his suspicions. The bundle had been put up in haste, and so far went to justify an inference unfortunate to us. But it appeared to satisfy him that it contained no articles of weight, and he, after balancing it a moment in his hands, the feeling of it, and turning it over, returned it to Nathaniel. The boy took it angrily, and favored him with a scowl which would have been appropriate enough in deep tragedy. The watchman, however, paid not the smallest attention to the angry youngster. "Remain a moment just as you are," said he, and stepped a couple of paces aside and conferred with his companion. We felt that it would not be safe to pursue any other course than the one which was forced upon us. Martha and I, in a subdued voice, argued the feasibility of bribing them or attempting it, but there was more danger than chance of success in that, and we relinquished it. The one who had first spoken then stepped back, the silent gentleman appearing to leave everything to the direction of the other. "You are probably very honest people," said he, "and as good as I am myself. but I think it best for you to go with me to the police quarters on the next block. You will not, I think, have to stay more than a few minutes. At least I hope so." I commenced to remonstrate with him, but he was firm. There was nothing left us but to follow his orders. Even now, although the circumstances would seem to be enough to try the temper of a strong-minded man, I could see no signs of alarm or disturbance on Martha's part. She clung a little closer to me, but her look was as composed and her walk just as even and self-reliant as before. Master Nat, however, did not by any means take it so philosophically. He declined going at all, and there seemed some chance of a disturbance, for the officers turned sternly to him, and one of them raised his arm. Jack growled and erected the hair of his neck. A moment more, and there would probably have been a fight, for when Nat's blood was up, and Jack's too, they would have made battle with St. George's dragon himself. "What?" said Martha, stepping to the boy, and as she stood between him and the constable, laying her hand on his shoulder, "Thee will not desert us now, when we want thy help the most." It was enough. The premeditated tempest was quelled. Nat picked up the parcel from where it dropped on the flagstones, tucked it under his arm, chirped for the dog to follow him, and without a word further trudged, with cast-down eyes, to meet the same fate as ours. The distance to the police station was soon reached, and we entered the front way, passed through to the back room, and there waited the pleasure of our captors. 2 or 3 half-dozing men were on a wooden settee in the room. One of them rose and civilly brought a chair for Martha, who sat down. I stood with my hands on the back of the chair, not feeling very well at ease. Nathaniel rested himself on a stool nearby, and Jack, evidently aware that there was now leisure for it, stretched himself at full length on the floor, and had a good time with his head between his forepaws. That was Chapter 17 of Life and Adventures of Jack Engle, an Autobiography, in which the reader will find some familiar characters, by Walt Whitman. Read by Frank Blissett.